Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK Cup week number 2 overview and analysis video in, of course, the winter split here. I'm very excited to get back into some LCK action. We got our first taste of how these LCK teams were going to perform at the beginning of the year last week, and we covered every single game in my week 1 video. Definitely recommend you check that out if you haven't already. Same thing with the LCK Cup primer video that I put out a couple of weeks ago, but today we're going to be covering week number 2 with how short the LCK Cup regular season quote unquote is. It's massive for these teams to pick up wins now and not wait. Obviously, this is kind of the last full week of the LCK regular season already. Next week, week number 3, it's one series per day. Every team only has one best of after this that they have left to do. So you got to win, and you got to win now. If you guys are excited, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you think of the games this week? Were you excited? Were you surprised? Were there any upsets that you wanted to call out? I'm always curious to know your thoughts and opinions down below. But without further ado, let's get into things. Small announcement at the start here. No graphic or anything for it, but I am casting tonight as this video is going up for LPL English. If you are interested in hearing my thoughts on some League of Legends games live, go ahead and check out the links in the description to both the YouTube and the Twitch, whichever one you end up preferring. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the content. If you are new to the channel, what we're going to do in today's video is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. The only way to start is, of course, to start with day number 1, and we got a pretty nice matchup on day number 1. Two teams that I think are looking to establish themselves, but one is clearly out to a better start. It was Dplus KIA taking on NS RedForce, and Dplus KIA is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. They just continue to be a bit on fire at the start of this split. They looked fantastic in the winter last year, and it looks like they're carrying that over. They are 3-0 so far, and they've had some pretty nice games in there. It's not exactly been the most difficult of schedules for DK, but the players that we needed to see step up and play well are playing fantastic right now. Lucid had a great week number 1, still made a lot of plays here in this series, but this was once again Showmaker popping off, as we'll talk about, of course, on the Twisted Fate in game number 3, but also Career, I think, having a phenomenal showing and really kind of showcasing that he was the top support prospect available in the offseason. For NS on the other side, this team is still solid. I hate, coming out of this not feeling all that determined that NS is bad, but they played fine in this series. I think I was expecting them to be a lot weaker in terms of the way they perform. Maybe some of the parts that weren't very good were a bit shocking. I think Kingen and Lehens were definitely the players you had the most confidence in, not only coming out of week number 1, but generally coming into this split, and I think they were the ones to kind of let the team down in this particular series. But overall, I think NS is clearly better than the 3 worst teams in the league, and that's an okay place for them to be right now at the start of the year. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is pretty obviously going to Showmaker. Once again, this guy is just popping off at the beginning of the year, whether it's his rise in game number 1 or definitely more specifically his Twisted Fate in game number 3 that he just completely obliterates the map on. There really was no way for anyone to be able to keep up with him. It's crazy just how much Showmaker is out to prove everyone wrong. I know some people left some comments, or maybe one comment in my video last week when I mentioned, man, Showmaker looks different. It looks like he's more mentally locked in. It looks like the mentality and the overall approach to the game has changed a lot since last year going into now. I think he wanted to prove a lot of people wrong, wanted to prove that he is still one of the best players in the world, and someone in the comments was like, yeah, Showmaker said as much at the beginning of this season, and you can definitely see it. This guy is taking an approach to saying, well, if DK is just going to be an average team, if I play the more supportive, team-oriented style, then I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pick, Twisted Fate, move around the map, get as much gold on myself as possible, and carry games, and I want to see that out of Showmaker. We've been wanting to see that out of him for the last couple of years. It seems like almost every time he opts into being more aggressive, trying to salvage his team's season, it works out, and that's why I've been a big defender of the tape that we've seen from Showmaker in 2024 and 2025, because I think while the inconsistency is definitely there, the highs are also very much there. We still see that version of him that was the best mid laner in the world for a period of time in 2019, 2020, that era. So excited to see Showmaker continue that really great start to the year, and really the only hope is that he can keep it up a little bit more than he did in 2025. I already talked about it a bit before, but I really want to shout out Career. He was excellent in this series. His Nami in game number 3 was super devastating. It was very, very difficult for Kalista Renata to play this game. Generally, I think Kalista Renata is a little too weak right now. We've seen it in both the LPL and the LCK that, it is able to generate small leads, but there are so many bot lanes that can win 2v2 right now and also have a decently big impact in the later part of the game. The thing that Kalista Renata did relatively uniquely over the past couple of years, I think, has kind of been replaced. Lulu and Nami and Karma, and all these champions are coming back into the meta and getting a lot more play than maybe they had over the past couple of years. And AD carries like Lucian, like Misfortune, they're stepping up, and Ezreal as well, I guess to a smaller extent. They're stepping up, and they're, really a lot more meta now than they were, a couple of years ago as well. Like, a lot of the things that really can go toe-to-toe with Kalista, I think, are more popular than they've been in recent years, and we're seeing teams that pick Kalista Renata really struggle. I think Career was able to take advantage of Lehends on that Renata pick and really push the game forward. Showmaker and Career were definitely the two best players here for DK, and that's really exciting to say. Smash continues to be very good at the start of this split. He's very versatile, at least right now in the LCK. I don't know if he's going to be as versatile when they start going up against better competition, because their strength of schedule has been really weak so far, and I think this gives Smash a chance to try out things like Varus a little bit more safely than maybe he would in other scenarios, but he's been perfectly fine as a third option, quite frankly, on this team behind Lucid and behind Showmaker. Lucid continues to be aggressive, but he looks a little bit worse when he has to carry games. I like him on things like Jarvan and Vi. The Qiyana looked not as good, so we'll see how that ends up progressing. That is something that's been decently consistent for him throughout his career, where I think the carries have just not looked nearly as, fantastic. I don't think he's like Baby Canyon or anything like that. I think he's definitely going to settle in as being somebody that makes the rest of the team look great. Speaking of that, Shiwu was actually solid. His laning has certainly gotten better over the course of the offseason. That really was my biggest concern with him as a player. Outside of that, I think his skill set translates well, and he continues to play well. DK looked great in this series, and they start 3-0. And then for Nongshim on the other side, this is obviously an expected loss with the way that DK is playing. I think they very much cemented themselves as a top 4 team, and Nongshim is just not on that level yet. But I do think there are some positive takeaways from this series for this team. I think I really expected them to get beat a lot more convincingly than they got beat. There were some really nice moments from players like Scout and Sponge and Taeyun, and that's really encouraging. Sponge, I think, was as bad as I predicted in week number 1. He definitely looked like the weak link of this team. Taeyun, I think, really struggled to readapt himself to the LCK in week number 1, and while Scout had a great second series, that first series against Vikla and against BNK FearX was really bad from him, and that's a series that he needs to step up in. I was really looking for these 3 in particular to reassert themselves in week 2 and show that there's more than what we offered in week number 1, and we kind of got that here. I think Scout definitely played better than he did against Vikla here. He wasn't better than Showmaker, and he certainly got outpaced in game number 3 on the Akali, but I don't think the mistakes were nearly as prevalent as they were in previous years. Taeyun continues to be a player that his highs are high and his lows are very, very low. His laning is super volatile, and Lehends is also an incredibly volatile player for very different reasons, but it means that when things are not going well for this bot lane, they are really not going well. This might even be worse in that scenario than Jiwoo and Lehends were last year. Jiwoo, at the very least, has some sort of stability. Like, I'm not saying Taeyun is a worse player than Jiwoo, although I'm not saying that. I think, mechanically speaking, you can definitely compare the two, but I'm definitely saying that the stylistic, combination here of Taeyun and Lehends, I think, is a way to put it, is not something that I'm really excited about in the long term, and I think Lehends really suffered for it. He's getting dud of the series. His Renata was not good. Career just completely gapped him in terms of how this went down, especially in game number 3, but I think game number 1 as well, and the Nico was also not ideal. Lehends has not looked very Lehensy across this split up until this point. He is still dying, but he's dying in different ways than he did last year when his KDA would suffer and this team was not playing well because they had to play the 4 teams that went to Worlds over and over again. It's a very different kind of bad right now for Lehends, much more reminiscent of how he played early on in his career after the Griffin days on teams like Afrika, when he just really rarely found avenues to push the game forward because he was so far behind in 2v2 tempo. Part of that is Taeyun and the fact that they cannot win early on in games very consistently, especially when they're playing hyper carries, but it's also kind of on Lehends. I think this is a meta that he needs to just kind of ignore and go back to the things he's actually good at. Obviously, things like Elise and Shen were basically auto picks for him last year, but like, you're an engaged player, you're a playmaker, you're someone who wants to play Rakan and Nico and, Bard and all of these things. Like, even in terms of the meta, you don't need to be playing Kalista Renata as Taeyun Lehends. I think that is a waste of the talent on this team, and it's the same thing for Kingen on the top side. I want to see him play matchups that can win, although I think he got some of those. You're not banning out Zahan in game number 3, and I think that is also a pretty big mistake, and Kingen was excellent in week number 1, certainly the best player on Nongshim through the first week of the split. I'm not going to worry too much about him. I still think he's in very good form coming off of last year, and I expect him to do fine, but there are some things that this team needs to clean up. I think this bot lane is going to be a concern, and Sponge, even with some good moments, certainly didn't look like a strong jungler or anything like that in this series, because Lucid was a player that I think you could theoretically take advantage of with the way he was playing here. Scout looks fine. Again, I think Kingen will rebound, but Nongshim right now very firmly holding that number 7 spot outside of the top 6. And for Dplus KIA, it's a really nice win. The big question is what happens later on in the week when they finally actually play a team that's difficult to beat, but they passed every early test up until this point to give you the confidence that they are what the hype would kind of say they are. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and it's a battle between two of the bottom 3 that I kind of talked about. It's DRX taking on the DN SOOPers, and DNS picks up their first win of the split. Two teams here who went 0-2 in week number 1, but they did it in very different ways. I think DNS looked bad. I think that's a fair way to put it. Life was in as the starting support over Peter, and we were all questioning what is happening inside this organization to consistently just be making the worst possible decision at any given moment. And DRX was out there taking T1 to 3 games and looking super competitive in that series, utilizing some of the new coach rules more effectively, I think, than basically any other team in the league. That's why I put DRX above DNS, despite starting DRX at number 10. It's going to be a little bit tough for me to make sure I don't mix up these acronyms in this segment, but unfortunately for DRX, they couldn't carry that through into this series. I still think that there are a lot of positives to take away from the way they played, but look who is back in the starting lineup for the Soopers. It's Peter. He's here, and all of a sudden, they start winning games, and I get it. It's against DRX. It's not the hardest thing in the entire universe to beat DRX in a series, but all I'm saying is I don't think it would have been guaranteed if Life was in here as the starting support that they would have won this. I do not understand why he was on the bench at the start of the year. You know, he wasn't even perfect in this series. He had a pretty bad game number 1 on the Alistair, had a lot of moments where he needed to get recalibrated to the LCK, but what I think he does at such a high level, and the reason I really like this guy and think he's such an asset in the LCK, is because he's not scared. He has a little bit of that Lehen's playstyle in him where he just wants to be a playmaker. He's constantly going to be looking to engage and to find creative angles, and that means that even from spots that aren't as good for his team and for his bot lane, if they go behind in the 2v2, he can find ways to get his team back in the game that I think other supports just aren't able to do, and we saw a bit of that creativity, a bit of that playmaking instinct in this series on the Renata and on the Nico in 2 games, and I'm just really excited to see him back in the starting lineup. Life just gives you no floor, it gives you no ceiling. There's really just not a lot to like about starting Life as the support here. Peter, obviously coming off a World Finals appearance, getting back into the lineup is the best option, but he is not player of the series for me. That is going to go to Closer in the mid lane here for DNS. Closer kind of following through on some of the progression, we'll just say, that we saw out of him in 2025. I was much higher on him in 2025, I think, than other analysts were. This guy was clearly the best mid laner that wasn't a part of like the upper echelon, right? Like you're talking about the big 5 mid laners in the LCK. I think Closer was very clearly number 6 for me in 2025, and it's really cool to see that carry back over right now, at the very least, to 2026. UCal had a great game number 1 on the Orianna, but could not keep that tempo up on the Talia and on the Aurora. It doesn't look like he's going to be able to recapture some of that great form we saw in Winter last year, you know, that he kind of fell off of. It looks like Closer is definitely going to be closer to that positive mark, the rise, the Zoe that we're actually seeing really commonly right now in the LCK, a meta adaptation that I really like. I think Zoe's actually really strong right now in some very specific matchups, but Closer executing on it really well. You know, it's good to see him kind of be the leader of this team. I thought Pioshik was really good in week number 1 and continued to be very active here in week number 2. If those two can actually be a serviceable jungle mid duo, then yeah, this team does have like top 7, top 6 kind of upside, which, you know, we definitely didn't see in week number 1. Dekdom was fine. Dudu was whatever on the top side. Rich continues to really impress me at the start of this split. I think a lot of his laning problems are just not there right now. But again, I think DNS, generally speaking, really had one major flaw in week 1 that caused them to be uncompetitive, and they removed it. They removed Life from the starting lineup and put Peter back in. Now I think this team is definitely a lot more dangerous. And then for DRX on the other side, there's still a lot to like about the way they played in this series. It's kind of cliched to say, and I do get a bit worried at some point to say, wow, this team looks really good every time they lose. Like, it just kind of is the way that it is so far with a 0-3 start. They've looked very competitive and very close in all of the series, no matter the competition. They just have not been able to pick up a win. I think there is something in here, but if they don't start putting it together a little bit soon, I am going to start getting worried that they're just going to be a competitive team that doesn't really know how to actually win games, which is a bit of a problem that we've seen in the LCK in the past. Willer continues to be fantastic for this team in the jungle. I'm sorry, Vincenzo fans. I know there are a lot of you, especially in my comment section. I don't want to see this guy right now. Willer is playing too well in the jungle. He's absolutely the best player on DRX, and as much as I think Vincenzo deserves a spot in the LCK after the way he played at the end of last year, you know, I am a bit lower on him and what his current ability would be. I think this team would get worse if you put Vincenzo in right now, and you know, Willer's upside has always been there. This guy is borderline top 6 in terms of the jungle position. in the LCK. You know, he's basically Raptor, except a little better, and Raptor's doing well for himself over on BFX right now. So, you know, I really like Willer, and I think he is performing well. That aggression is going to use. Rich and UCal, I think, also had some really nice games. UCal had a great game number 1, just really let the team down in games 2 and 3, and Rich is just, like, playing well. Like, there's not even a ton to say. He's just in good form right now, which is really nice to see out of him. Unfortunately, the bot lane just wasn't on the same page. Jiwoo's scoreline looks pretty good, even coming out of game number 3, but his positioning was really a big problem for this team, and his lack of damage in some really important moments, I think, really let the team down. So for me, Jiwoo is going to get dud of the series. I considered Ondol for this as well, because I think a lot of the plays that Ondol went for, especially when he was on an Enchanter in game number 3, were not particularly good, but settled on Jiwoo because I think the plays he made were more egregious. I think Ondol was at the very least a playmaker, especially in that game number 1 on the Braum that they ended up winning, and Jiwoo was just kind of more a part of the team. He is not really getting back that Nongshim form yet in terms of his positioning, in terms of his aggressiveness in these team fights, especially his lead generation in the 2v2. He's just not really doing it all that consistently, and this is against Ductum and Peter, a bot lane that is kind of susceptible to 2v2 dominance. So definitely a bit disappointed to see the way that he started the year. It's still very early. I'm not going to give up on the idea that he can return to that 2024 form just yet, but it's looking a lot closer to 2025 than it is to 2024, and that's not really a great sign for Jiwoo fans. Either way, DRX continues to look overly competitive in their losses, and DNS finally picks up their first win of the split. This is obviously a nice way to get on the board for them. I think there is talent here. It's all really just about the consistency of Pioshik and Ductum and, you know, Closer are all going to play fine on this team. Peter getting reinserted is going to be able to raise their creativity and raise their playmaking ability. I think they do have the chance to actually compete a lot more than they did in week 1. Then moving on now to day number 2, and we kick off day number 2 with a series that really needed to happen for the teams involved, or at least one of the teams involved. It was HANJIN BRION taking on Hanwha Life, and Hanwha Life is finally going to pick up a win here in 2026. They had a terrible week number 1. Starting 0-2 is obviously a disaster situation for them, but going down, or I guess going even in this series through the first 2 games, 1-1, was when I was really starting to be like, uh-oh, if they lose to Bro, like, this team's dropping to, like, number 6 in my power rankings, because I just can't justify the way they're playing the game. Luckily for them, they're able to pull this out off the back of Zeka's Akali, but, like, what happens if Zeka doesn't get his best champion in this game? Do they continue to win? It's crazy how susceptible this team has been to just not making the right plays, being overly aggressive, and being in the wrong spots. As for Bro, on the other side, there is a ton to like from the team in this win, or I guess in their game 2 win, in their 1-2 loss, but there's a ton to like from the way they played. I was really critical of Namgung and Roamer in week number 1, and while I think Roamer continued to have a lot of struggles, Namgung I thought was a lot better in this series. He got to play an Elise game and it looked really good. In game number 2, Gideon was super active on the map. You know, Teddy was capitalizing on the aggression. There were a lot of things to like. They just couldn't quite piece it together in game 3. They kind of lost their minds in terms of their decision making, but we'll get into that. Let's start with Hanwha Life, of course. Player of the series is obviously Zeka in the mid lane. I don't really have to go into this. They don't win without him. It really is that simple. I'm not saying he was the only person to win in game 3. I just think, you know, game 1 was solid enough from him on the Azir, and he destroyed game 3 on the Akali. You know, Bro kind of gave him a pretty easy pass. The Ryze matchup can be relatively fine overall for Roamer, but he ended up playing it really poorly, and the team in general just played so slow that it gave this Vi Akali duo as much tempo and pressure as they wanted, and they were making every play on the map. So Zeka was just able to kind of be in his comfort zone in side lanes, being really aggressive, and this is what we wanted to see. We wanted to see whatever was ailing Zeka mentally last year kind of get locked out and him get locked back in as a player, and I think he's very much doing that right now in terms of the way he's playing. I'm not going to sit here and say he's been perfect at the start of the year. I think Hanwha Life has had their own set of problems everywhere on the map, but Zeka has probably been the most consistent player so far on the team, and it's nice to see him step up and really be the key figure on his key champion in their first win of the split. Other players on this team, I think, have both good and bad moments. Kanavi was a psychopath in this series. He really brought the LPL mentality with him back to the LCK. He is not afraid at all to constantly be making plays and to forego objective control in favor of just trying to get picks over and over again, as we saw in game 3. Luckily for him, Bro did absolutely nothing to try and punish that really at any point on the map, but I think this is a mentality that he is going to have to temper down. I don't think if he plays like this in every single series, things are going to be phenomenal. I think that there were some decisions on the map made by this team that were just incorrect. And I'm hopeful that Kanavi can really kind of lock that in a little bit. I think his aggression really worked in the LPL because he had a lot of players that were constantly winning in lanes and could help him out in a lot of circumstances. And it kind of worked internationally as well. I mean, you can talk about the strength of schedule that Top Esports had at the World Championships, but they still got to the semifinals. They still beat, Billy Gaming and G2 and got themselves into an area where they could be top 4 at that tournament. Kanavi just needs to get back to that kind of decision making, and I think that that's going to be fine because that's still incredibly aggressive, but it's tempered in a little bit more around his laners and not so much around just being aggro for the sake of being aggro inside lanes. So as much as I do think Kanavi ended up being really valuable here against better teams, I think that the plays he made here would be less valuable, if that makes sense. Delight, I think, was solid enough. He's still not quite locked in the same way he was in his 2025, where I thought he really just became clearly one of the best supports in the world. Not that he already wasn't, but like it was the best year of his career. It seems like he's still trying to find that form back again, even on things like Rakan in game number 1, but he still was making plays, and I think he was probably the second best player on the team behind Zeka in this series, but Guma is just not locked in right now. I don't really know what it is. He's had 2 series of the 3 so far where I just think he's been disconnected from the rest of this team. Maybe it is just a lack of synergy and a lack of communication. This guy has really only played with one team his entire career. It's going to be tough to adapt to basically an entirely new set of communication tools and people and just all of this. He's not really had to change up his style all that much in his pro career. This is a big ask of him, and I think obviously if it's not perfect in winter, I'm going to give him a bit of grace in transitioning a little bit more throughout the rest of the year. One player, though, that I'm not giving grace to right now is Zeus on the top side. I don't know what's going on, man. Like, this guy's laning has just become really bad. I can't even begin to diagnose the problem because it's nothing like what the issues with Zeus have been in the past. It's not just him overextending and getting caught in bad situations. It's like he's actively just going down in golden resources, and that's just so strange. Like, Casting is a talented top laner, but Zeus has no business being behind against Casting in any matchup at any time. It just is kind of insane to me. He got bailed out in game number 3 because they actually picked Cassante into Gwen. I know that doesn't seem like the way that this would go in terms of the draft, but it's what they chose to do. So, he kind of gets bailed out there, but like that's a hen game in game number 2, a champion that everyone has looked super broken on. He looked useless on that champion. So I don't know, man. Guma and Zeus, I think, need to lock in. For now, Zeka is stabilizing. Kanavi's aggressive plays are working, but I don't know for how much longer that is going to be the case. For Bro on the other side, Roamer just continues to be awful. I really hate this. I have to kind of apologize to viewers of the channel because I was pretty bullish that like, hey, I want Roamer to start on this team over Fisher, and they listened to me. They very much went, yeah, Roamer's been a solo queue star. He's had a lot of promise in terms of how he's played at lower levels in the past. Let's give him a shot in tier 1. It ain't working. Like, it's not working out, man. He has been truly horrific in all 3 of their series up until this point. I get the competition level in the LCK in the mid lane is like ridiculously difficult, but you gotta be more competitive than whatever he's been in his first couple of series here. I'm not saying that I want them to give up on him, but like, I don't know, man. Am I at the point where I want to be like, oh, maybe they should put in Fisher? I'm getting closer to that, which I never thought in a million years I would ever say about any team in the LCK ever. So certainly something to keep in mind. I also think Gideon made some massive mistakes. I really considered Gideon for dud of the series here, almost entirely for game number 3. He was so good in game 2, and so was Roamer to that end, because they were playing Xin Zhao Talia. They had a ton of map open up for them because 2v2 was winning on the bottom side of the map, and they really just had a lot of ways to be able to play the game. They were proactive, they were aggressive, and they were taking the fight to Hanwha life. And then for some reason, in game number 3, they go, you know what worked? Being proactive. You know what we should not do at all? Be proactive. It was so strange. This Wukong was constantly late on basically every decision that was made. The Vi and the Akali were playing for picks the entire game in side lanes, and what was Wukong doing? Certainly not objectives. They weren't even trying to contest them at any point throughout this series. It just felt really passive to me. Gideon, not a player that I really know for being passive, but I was frustrated because I thought he was super good in game number 2 and really did outplay Kanavi in some pivotal moments, and we know Gideon has that in him from last year, so just wanted to see something a bit better there. Casting was fine in this series. Again, through the first couple of games, he was probably better than Zeus, which is not something I expected to say, and Teddy and Namgung, I think, did get better from what they were last week, especially Namgung in terms of how he played the early 2v2, but at the end of the day, they just didn't quite have the firepower to be able to overcome a very weakened Hanwha life. It makes sense, Bro shouldn't even be in this conversation in the first place. They are another team that continues to look at least fine in their losses, not quite as fine, in my opinion, as a team like DRX, but Roamer is probably the biggest weak link in the entire league right now. And then for Hanwha life on the other side, like I said, they just need to figure things out. Right now, they are barely winning. They're 1-2, and their one win is a close victory against the worst team in the league. It really is looking about as dire as it can. The only thing you can feel pretty confident about is that the talent on this team should be able to figure it out, but for now, I am definitely in a wait-and-see approach on whether or not this is even one of the top 3 teams in the LCK. But that's going to bring us to our second series of day number 2. And unfortunately for one of these undefeated teams, they will no longer have a 0 in their loss column. It was BNK FearX taking on Gen.G. And Gen.G is going to continue their run of dominance at the start of this year. I said it last week. I will say it again this week. I don't know if I've seen a team so determined to dominate at the beginning of the year in the same way that I've seen Gen.G. I do think this was probably their closest series, which is really funny in hindsight. I know their week 1 schedule wasn't particularly difficult, but BNK FearX actually looks great out of the gate. I'm not trying to sit here and say that they are like a top 4 team or a team that you should expect to go to Worlds, but you know what? They kind of look like a team that could compete for it, which is insane. We'll talk about some of the progression that they have made and some of the things that have clearly gotten better for this team, but Gen.G is Gen.G. Even when they're making mistakes and dying and losing in certain areas, they're still so far ahead that it doesn't even really matter, and then you get an unkillable rise in game number 2, and the series just kind of ends. Player of the series is Chovy. I mean, come on, man. I almost have to find reasons not to give it to Chovy for the most part in these series at this point. As you guys know, I have to go, oh, well, Chovy's always good, so Duro gets it here, or Keen gets it here, or, you know, whatever. Ruler can get it when he pops off and makes a really funny comment that goes viral on social media, but I'm sorry, man. This was an unkillable rise in game number 2. He was absolutely dominant, and this is with him getting solo killed by Vikla. We'll talk about Vikla. What a start to the year for this guy. He has completely rebounded. He's looking like one of the best mid laners in the entire league right now in terms of the form that he's in, but Chovy locked in for game number 2. He said, nah, game number 1 didn't matter. We're not worrying about it too much. The Azir was also fine in the late game. He did a lot of damage in that game, but the Ryze was genuinely unstoppable. Again, you don't really ever look at Ryze as a champion that is kind of unkillable. There are a lot of ways to kill Ryze, but when you put Ryze on the best player in the world, he kind of becomes unkillable because all of a sudden the movement speed is a huge problem. He has so many different tools to be able to escape bad situations. He can tank a bunch of damage with the build, obviously, that he is most known for, the big shield build, if you want to call it that, whatever people are using in terms of the terminology for it now. Like, Chovy on Ryze almost feels like a bit of a cheat code, but there are so many champions that feel like a cheat code for Chovy that it's almost not even worth calling out. Like, that's just where we're at. Chovy was phenomenal, he was unkillable, and he was extremely dominant on the Ryze in game number 2, more than deserving of the player of the series. Want to point out for Ruler, shout out to him, he becomes the first Jin in a major region to win. That is an insane stat. I believe Jin was 0-14 before this game, 0-12, something like that. It was not looking good for old Jin in pro play at the beginning of this year, but Ruler finally comes out and picks up a win on that champion, leave it to Gen.G to finally get a win for any random champion. But Ruler played fine in this series. I think he was doing a ton of damage on both the Corki and the Jim. He was doing really well, I think, in game number 1 in particular. Duro continues to look like one of the best supports in the world. A lot of the progression that we saw from him last year is very real. You know, glad to see him continue on that positive, you know, I guess trajectory line, the positive graph, however you want to put that. Keen was great on the top side. This is probably the best top laner in the league versus the worst in clear, at least from my perspective, and it's nice to see that Keen was able to get the better of him in a way that you would have expected him to. He was great in game 1 on the Crocodile on that Renekton, and Canyon was fine as well. Raptor had a bunch of mistakes that Canyon capitalized on. He was over-eager, I would say, at times in game number 1 on the Jarvan, but, you know, I'm not going to fault him too much for looking for plays on the best team in the world. So Gen.G continuing to look dominant. They're, you know, 3-0 to start, just as we all expected. And for BFX, they actually put up an okay fight here. Again, I'm not going to be too disappointed in the way that they ended up playing. The only thing to really be disappointed by is Raptor didn't really look all that good on some aggressive picks in this series. The Pantheon, the Kiana, they did not really work out. Raptor, for me, the obvious choice for dud of the series. I like Raptor as a player, but I do think inherently there are some flaws and some limiting upside kind of traits with him because he is so feast or famine. The player I've always compared him to is Croco. I think they're very similar players. Hell, Willer actually is a great comparison, the player he actually replaced on this BFX team. I think they all have relatively similar playstyles where from ahead or from a good position, they can create a lot. And in terms of resource generation, they're actually some of the most valuable players in the entire league. But the problem comes down to what happens if the game is not going their way, how they play from behind, which is just not very good, right? Like, think the Razork playstyle for Fnatic over in the LEC, where you really need to make sure that your team is as comfortable as possible going into the mid game so they can, you know, play off of that advantage. And when that's not happening, or alternatively, when Raptor is playing a carry and kind of needs to be the one pushing the game forward instead of someone like Vikla or Diablo, things do get more challenging. I think the Kiana was a mistake in game number 2. You know, picking something like Kiana in general against Gen.G is incredibly risky because they can take that champion out of the game incredibly easily, and Canyon kind of did that on the Xin Zhao, and of course Chovy was just such a menace on the Rise that you couldn't even really assassinate the biggest target on the other side of the Rift. I just don't think Raptor was good enough here, but Vikla looks awesome. This guy continues to have a fantastic start to the year. He wasn't perfect in game number 2 on the Orianna, but that Akali game in game number 1, I don't know, man. Am I buying Vikla stocks right now? He was player of the week for the entirety of the LCK for me in week number 1, and he just came out here and solo killed Chovy in lane in game number 1 as well. Like, if this is the best year of his entire career, that's really funny, and it's really, really cool, and it, pays this organization back a lot, I think, for sticking with him instead of promoting someone like Daystar that I think we all just expected to see as the starting mid laner for this team going into the year. Credit to Vikla. He's taken a lot of the adversity and a lot of the criticism well, and he is battling back very strongly. Great start to the year for him. Diablo and Kellen are still one of the most dangerous bot lanes in the league. Clear was okay. I'm not going to sit here and rag on him. It really was just Raptor that was the biggest problem on the team. I'm not saying they beat Gen.G if Raptor plays a little bit better, but they were competitive in this series, and this is a team you do have to watch out for. But Gen.G are just kind of unstoppable at number 1 right now in these power rankings. They're clearly the best team in the world, and it's not particularly close. All I'm really looking forward to is when they actually play against a good team, and that's getting closer and closer every single day. But then moving on now to our middle day of the week here, day number 3, and we kicked off our middle day with a World Finals rematch for the first time in 2026. It was KT Rolster taking on T1, a telecom war, and T1 is going to pick up the victory here. This was, unfortunately for KT Rolster, not going to be their revenge arc for World Finals last year. If anything, this just kind of confirms where both of these teams are at right now. T1 is clearly in that upper echelon, despite the fact that game number 2 was ridiculous, and we'll talk about it. The fact that T1 walks out of this series without losing a single game is just unbelievable. This might be one of the biggest comebacks I've ever seen in League of Legends in game number 2, and for KT, how do you let this happen? How do you get to a point where you're up as much as you are in game 2? I don't even know the full number, but it's double digit, like it's 5 digits in terms of the gold lead that KT had in game number 2, and yet somehow, some way, with Yunara, with Akali, with Sejuani, with Nico, even Rek'Sai on the top side, with that kind of lead, you can't close out the game and you cannot win it. It's just ridiculous. Credit to T1 for being so perseverant in this game, I guess. I think that's probably the way to put it, but this should never have happened. And you know what? It's hard to really analyze where KT is at right now because of it. So we'll get into it. I promise we'll talk about KT. I think they're the more interesting conversation to have here. But let's give more credit to T1. If you ever thought that their resilience was going to go away, first of all, who are you? What was the expectation here? But second off, like, T1 has just never been in a situation where they're not able to, be the more clutch team, we'll just say, at the end of a game. Even domestically, the only team that's ever been able to do it against them consistently has been Gen.G, and nobody else has really been able to output that same kind of, plus minus in terms of T1 in the late game, if you will. But, I mean, it's just the way it goes. Faker and Owner step up in the back end on Dr. Mundo and on Azir, and you're looking also at a team comp for T1 that does just want to get to their item spikes. The moment that they hit 4 items, they can win any game. It doesn't matter how much gold they're down, and that is exactly what happened. I do want to give player of the series to Faker. He probably was the best player on the Rift throughout this entire series. I thought he was excellent in game number 1 on the Rise, a champion that we're seeing really succeed right now. Shout out Lissandra support, by the way. Incredible stuff in game 1 from KIA. Very, very funny. But game number 2, you can make a real strong argument that Owner was the guy in game number 2, that he stepped up in the pivotal fight at the end of the game on Dr. Mundo, refusing to die, doing a ton of damage, and winning the game for his team. I think that that would be an entirely fair understanding of how this ends up breaking down. Again, I think Faker was probably better over the course of both games. Not that Owner at all was bad in game number 1 on the Vi, just that I think Faker's Rise was great, and Owner certainly had some problems in the early game on Dr. Mundo, but this is a bit of a redemption game, in my opinion, at least a little bit from what he was in World's quarterfinals. Yes, they did win that game, his first time ever playing Dr. Mundo, but he was terrible in that game. He tried his best to send T1 home in the quarterfinals against anyone's legend, and just didn't quite get the chance to do it. I think him being able to bounce back, have a great Mundo game, and really be the pivotal piece, if we're being honest, like at the end of game number 2, that is really nice for Owner. I thought he had a great week number 1. He was one of, if not the best performing jungler in the entire league in week number 1, and I think he has carried that over so far into this series. Again, Faker is getting it because of the consistency, but those two players are the ones you really want to point out. Shout out KIA, very fun series from him, getting to play things like Lissandra in the support position. Even the Lulu in game number 2, still very fun. It's always exciting when KIA gets to play something silly and it works out really well, because that's just kind of what he's known for. He's known for a lot of these creative picks. I think Doran was fine on the top side. Top laners didn't really matter all that much, even though he was Zehen in game number 2. You would have expected him to potentially take over a bit more, but wasn't meant to be. Doran was more just kind of a part of the team. Only negative I'll give is that Pays was not great in game number 2. I think he made a lot of mistakes on the Aphelios, and I think he's probably looking around going, wait a minute, if I underplay in the late game, we can still win? That's not been the case for me on JDG over the past year, so he's probably feeling pretty happy with the circumstance and situation as of right now. It's a nice win for T1, but it is a terrible loss. Let's just be honest for KT Rolster. The fact that you cannot walk out of this series with a game win, despite the way that you played in the early game, is just disgusting. Like, there's really not much else I can possibly say. I think Cuz really underperformed in big moments here. He's not going to get done of the series for me because I thought he had a great early game on the Sejuani going into the Dr. Mundo. He was able to be kind of the pivotal reason they were able to generate that big gold lead in game number 2. He just couldn't quite hang on to it. And again, I think he made some massive mistakes in some of their team fights. I think you could say similar things about like aiming or BDD, who I think, you know, again, should have been more effective on the Akali and on the Yunara. You are still going into Aphelios and Azir. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, you know, this comp is like unbeatable in the later part of the game or anything like that when you're staring down 2 of the biggest hyper carries in a Dr. Mundo with a Lulu and a Zahen. Like, T1 literally built for this stage of the game, but you needed to be more effective. You certainly needed to be more clinical in terms of your execution, and it just wasn't that. That being said, somehow, some way, I'm giving dud of the game or dud of the series overall to Polu, who continues to just be bad. He only played game number 1 here on the Rakan. Ghost actually came in and played game number 2 on the Nico, but Ghost is so much better than Polu that I cannot imagine continuing to play this 6-man roster. The only reason that you brought Polu in, and to me, the only reason he was getting time at all at the support position is because you didn't quite know what the floor was going to be for Ghost. You know, ideally, in a perfect situation, the floor is higher for Polu, but the ceiling is higher for Ghost, and you kind of play off of that. You get Ghost up to speed, and then you can play him as your full-time support later on in the year if Polu doesn't progress. Polu's floor is so much lower than Ghost's. Ghost has played so much better than Polu has so far this year, so I just don't really want to see him anymore. It's a similar conversation to what we talked about with the DN SOOPers, where it's like, why are you playing Life when you have Peter on the roster? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Perfect has also not really started out the year all that hot. This is a lot more similar to what we saw out of him, you know, for the most part in the LCK rather than what we saw at Worlds, where he was really, really good. This definitely feels more, I guess, the trajectory we were expecting, which was an average to maybe even slightly below average top laner at this level. Overall for KT, I don't feel good about this team. You were able to get a big lead, but you really have no business losing this game, and I think that's really frustrating. But for T1, the resilience continues to carry on. This team continues to be basically unbeatable in back and forth games that go into the late game, and Owner and Faker, as a duo in particular, have started out white hot so far in 2026. Really excited to see if this team can compete for a #1 spot. But then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and it's another very important one towards the bottom of the standings. It's NS RedForce taking on DRX, and DRX is going to pick up their first series win of the year, and this team continues to look a lot better than I think I expected them to. I really thought they were going to look like a bottom, 1, bottom 2 kind of team, but they continue to put up a really nice fight in a lot of these games. I really do believe that they are better than NS right now in terms of the way that they are producing. They've looked good in their losses. I think their wins have been solid enough. They took a game off of T1, and they are by far the best team in the world right now. Not that there are a lot of, examples or, I guess, teams to go up against them in this regard. They are the best team in the world at utilizing this new coach timeout thing that they have in the LCK, because this team looks completely rejuvenated almost every single time they get a bit of instruction, which makes a lot of sense because these players are very mechanically talented, but they're not always making the right decisions. So nice stuff from DRX. Let's talk about it. Ondol, for me, is actually going to get player of the series. Really excited to be able to say that. Is this the best series, like full series, that Ondol has had as an LCK player? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's never been good. He had a couple of really nice series at the beginning of splits. I remember when Bull was subbing in for KDF after Taeyun was just so clearly one of the worst players in the entire world. Very funny, by the way. Ondol actually looked really good during that first couple, the first couple of weeks, I should say, once Taeyun came in, and it's like, okay, you might have something here in Ondol as a player, and then it kind of faded away. I think you could even say similar things at the beginning of the year before, where it's like, okay, he starts out strong and then he ends kind of weak, and it's just, it is what it is, right? Like, he's never seemed to be able to keep that consistency up, but this was really like a game-breaking support performance against a player in Lehens who has been the best support in the world before. Obviously, I don't think he's there right now. I thought he was better than what he was at the end of last year, but it's clear that maybe even that was wrong. Like, that might have been just me covering up for Lehens a little bit too much after a really bad legend stage, but like Lehens is still a good player, and Ondel coming out and just being better than him in terms of how he played game number 3 on the Bard, really impressive stuff. So want to give him a lot of credit there. Willer continues to be super impressive. Massive jungle gap between these two in this series. Willer is leaps and bounds better than Sponge, and it continues to be really funny that Sponge was starting for this team last year while Willer was sitting in the Challengers League for BNK FearX for so many different years, because Willer is just so clearly an LCK, caliber talent. This guy is like borderline a top 5 jungler in the league right now. I don't think his talent level is all that dissimilar to like where, I don't know, Lucid is right now. Maybe he's a little worse than someone like Lucid, but like I just think that highly of Willer. I think he's a very good player. He's basically Croco, and Croco's doing super well in the LPL right now for LNG. It's just cool to see this guy get another shot after years of people kind of clamoring for it, and him very much living up to the expectations and proving to people that he should have been in the LCK all along. Again, I feel kind of bad for Vincenzo because he was supposed to be the starter here, but Willer is just better, and they will win a lot more games with him in the jungle position. Do also want to give a shout out to Jiwoo, much better in this series than he was previously. Taeyun was able to generate some big leads on Kalista and on Caitlyn, but he wasn't able to maintain a lot of those leads. I think Jiwoo was much more clinical in the later parts of the game. Yukao was solid, certainly not a bad series from him. Scout was the best player on Nongshim in this one. Same thing for Kingen. Kingen was also fine, but Rich was doing his thing. He was team fighting, and he wasn't really causing waves on the top side. I like this DRX team right now. I really didn't expect to, especially once Jiwoo kind of came out the gate a little bit slow. Even Yukao, I think, came out of the gate a little bit slow, but Willer is growing on me a lot. I think Rich is playing really well right now, and Ondel actually kind of looks good after a pretty bad week number 1. DRX definitely have something to build on here, and for Nongshim on the other side, like their problems are just so clear. It is so obvious that they do not have the talent to be able to go toe-to-toe with even like some of the bad teams in the LCK if like their weak link players are underperforming, and those weak link players right now are Sponge and Taeyun, and it really just is very clear that that is the case. Sponge is going to get dead of the series for me. He was awful here today. Massive jungle gap in favor of Willer. Again, Sponge going against his former org that he played for 2 years here in DRX, and it just isn't working out for him. He's just not an LCK caliber jungler. I made a joke in the off-season primer video that I'm sure a lot of you remember where I'm like, oh, Lehens and Kingen accidentally hit on Gideon last year when they were trying to get the worst jungler in the league, so they wanted to rectify that mistake this year by bringing Sponge in. They certainly wouldn't miss on him being the worst jungler in the league, and that continues to kind of be the case. He's probably the worst jungler in the LCK, and that makes it very difficult for this team to win games because unfortunately, Scout is actually playing really well. I don't say unfortunately, fortunately for Nongshim, Scout is actually playing incredibly well for this team. He's producing a lot in lane. He's very active in the mid game. It seems like a lot of those mental errors of him getting caught out randomly across the map have kind of disappeared so far in 2026. It just doesn't matter. Kingen is also in great form on the top side, but Lehens had a terrible series. When you're getting gapped by Ondel, who was also bad in week number 1, that's a really bad sign. Lehens needs to get back into form, and he needs to get back there fast. He's going to be in the running for Dud of the Week for the entirety of the LCK, and that's pretty unacceptable for a player of his caliber. Taeyun also ignored the stat line. He was able to generate some leads, get some kills, but this guy's positioning in teamfights was horrible. I mean, this is the Taeyun that we remember. He's a little bit better. I would definitely say he's like somewhere in between the LCK version of him and the LPL version of him in terms of what he is for Nongshim this year, but he is not a positive right now for this team. They have plenty of issues, and quite frankly, I said earlier, oh, maybe Nongshim's actually, closer to being 5 or 6. They're not in the bottom 3. I don't know, man. DRX looks good. DN SOOPers looked good earlier this week against DRX. It might be a bottom 4 right now for Nongshim, and DRX might even be above them in terms of how you might want to power rank this. Willer genuinely looks that good. He might be the best player on either of these two teams at the current moment, and again, if you get anything out of Yukao, Jiwoo, and Ondel, who just were not giving you a ton last year, then DRX can actually be a team that I think surprises some people. Then moving on now to day number 4 and the second half of our week here in the LCK, and kicking off day number 4 was a matchup between Hanwha Life Esports and the DN SOOPers. And Hanwha Life Esports is going to pick up yet another 2-1 series win, and yet again, they probably could have lost game number 3 against a team that is much worse than them. I don't really know what's going on right now, man, with HLE. Like, it is staggering to watch this team play the game with the talent level that they have, and even seeing, like, yeah, I think Kanavi's doing fine. He's maybe a bit too over-aggressive, but generally he's getting resources. Zeka has been okay. I think Closer put up a good fight in this series. I think both of these mid laners had good moments. Gumayushi had a great series. Him and Delight, I think, finally linked up to be able to play 2v2 and really get some pressure, and we'll just say resources, onto the AD carry himself, rather than Delight needing to go elsewhere on the map to get those resources. Like, there are things that feel like they're going right for Hanwha Life, and yet the game is just not coming around to them at the moment. Their macro is really bad. They don't really play together, but luckily, DNS might be even worse on that front. I can kind of see maybe why they didn't put Peter in, and this has nothing to do with Peter, but almost every single time Peter went to make a play in this series, Pyosik was like, yeah, I see you, I'm gonna do anything but that. Like, I will do literally anything on the Rift that isn't with Peter. Like, it is truly absurd. Is there a personal problem between these two? Because it almost was laughable in game number 3 that Peter and even Dudu to an extent would be looking for engages on this Rel and this Aatrox and trying to find ways into the backline, and Pyosik would just be like, yeah, I don't care about any of that. I'm gonna go do something else. So it was just so strange. We'll talk about it a bit more when we get to DNS. But for Hanwha Life Player of the Series is gonna go to Guma. I think he deserved it. I really do think he's had a rough start here on Hanwha Life, but it's not been quite as bad as maybe some people are making it out to be. I think it's been about 50-50 right now. I think he's had 2 good series, and I think he's had 2 bad series for this team. You would obviously have hoped he would have been better, but look at the player he replaced in Viper over in the LPL. He's basically going through the same thing right now. Both of them are playing, I think, at almost identical levels in terms of how they're performing at the start of 2026. Let's remind ourselves that it's still January. This is still kind of the feeling out process for a lot of these players, them getting comfortable in their new orgs, and Guma is a player who has no experience outside of the T1 bubble. It's going to take him a bit of time to get used to playing in another environment with different communication styles, but at the very least in this series, he finally figured out how to get his own resources in the early game so that he could take over. Loved him on the Ziggs in game number 3. You know, he's always been a really good weak side player, but I think Ziggs in particular in this meta can really be a nuisance because so many teams are just picking hyper carries like the Aphelios on the other side of this matchup for Doctum. And Guma, I think more than most AD carries, is really good at punishing when other sides want to be safe and don't really understand how to push forward in the 2v2. Guma is really, really good at taking those resources and maximizing them, getting the most out of that situation. And I think he did that in game number 3. He was still very good in game 1 on the Varus as well. That was much more expected. These are his 2 best, you know, champions at the very least right now, the Varus and the, not the Ziggs so much, but just the Varus and then, you know, 2v2 pushing bot lane. Like, this is the idea behind what you want to draft around Gumayushi, and I think it made a lot of sense here. Delight obviously was part of that. I think Peter was super active on the map. I don't think every play Peter made was good per se, but I think he was trying to make plays, and again, that's something that Life just wasn't doing, and also it was clear that this team was almost mad at him for trying to make plays. It was absurd. We'll get into that, but Delight definitely had much more of an impact on the series as a whole. Kanavi, I think, continues to really be that aggro, you know, pushing forward force. He has really brought that LPL mentality to the LCK. I don't really know if it's working. It's working against Pyosik, but like, it should be working better in these situations, right? Like earlier this week, they drop a game to Bro, and it's like, okay, you know, you probably shouldn't be losing to Gideon. As much as I like Gideon, it's probably not where you should be right now if you are a jungler. And then, you know, Kanavi kind of getting punished a bit by Pyosik at times, especially in game number 2. It's like, okay, we really got to rein this in a little bit. It feels like he's kind of lost a lot of that middle ground that we talked about him finding at Worlds and really towards the end of the summer split. I have a lot of faith that he's going to be able to get it back. Remember, this is his first time playing in the LCK ever. Like, this guy left before he could ever even debut in Tier 1 to go to the LPL. Let's give him some time to adjust to the league, to the different pace of play, and perhaps some of those aggressive tendencies will go. I think Zeka's had a good start. Zeus is just off his game, man. I don't think this guy is good at all right now. Like, I think he's doing almost everything wrong, and I truly do feel like he's performed like a bottom 3 top laner in the league so far. I have no clue what the problem is on the top side for Zeus, but Dudu outplayed him in this one as well. It's just weird. Like, again, all 4 series, I feel like he's been the weaker top laner. That's not something that I imagine will continue, but at least until he kind of turns it around, I am going to be concerned about him, but everything else kind of worked out for the team, specifically the bot lane in this series. But for DNS, just as I was getting excited about what they could become because Peter came in and added some life to the team, it's almost like Pyosik was like, I preferred when we didn't have it. I preferred when life was in here and we didn't have, well, we had life, but we didn't have life. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's so strange to see Pyosik almost protest having a good support. Like, it's just, I don't believe what is going on. He's dudded the series. I mean, this was, I guess, close to what he was last year. I think he was better than this last year, which is ironic because I think he was probably the worst jungler in the LCK last year. I lambasted this team for even bringing him back at all in 2026. Quite frankly, if you go back and watch my content from last year, all I did in basically every single DN FearX review was go, why is Pyosik not getting benched for like Void, who was their Challengers League jungler at the time? Like, Pyosik even being on the team last year was already ridiculous. And then he comes out this year, he starts decently decently well. He has a decent week number 1, even though the team's not performing well. He plays well in their win over DRX earlier this week, and I start to go, okay, maybe Pioshik is going to figure things out, lock in a little bit. Peter coming back is probably going to help this team's macro. It was the opposite. Peter coming back has established an identity for this team, and it's not the one that Pioshik wants, and now he's just running it down. This is one of the worst Hecarim games you'll ever see. Like, what are we doing? Hecarim? It's 2026, man. You got to understand what the meta is right now. You can't sit in the jungle and farm until you're 8,000 CS. It's not really working. You know, Karthus, Hecarim, they're not champions that are going to be as effective in the meta when you have no way to bridge that gap, and Pioshik was awful in this game, and that's despite the fact that I think the rest of this team played really well. Dudu was better than Zeus. I think Peter was making a lot of plays on the map. He just didn't have any follow-up. Doctum was over-aggressive and was getting caught out, but that's mostly because his jungler kept inting him. Closer was fine, basically even with Zeka throughout this series. Almost everyone else on this DNS team actually played well, and I think this team looked good, but Pioshik made sure that they were not going to win this series. Like, genuinely, it looked like he was, like, either mentally protesting or, like, actively losing his team the game on purpose. Like, I have never seen a player just go, hey, whatever the team is doing, I will not be a part of it. I will not be there. I'm not even going to attempt to pretend that I'm friends with anybody else I'm on the team with. Like, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So, yeah, Pioshik is one of the biggest duds of the series that we've given out this year, and Guma got to benefit from it. Hanwha Life in general gets to benefit from it. This might be the most fraudulent 2-2 team I've watched in a very long time, and they're Hanwha Life Esports. Like, how did we get here with HLE? I mean, this team looks very lost. I think they probably lose both of the series this week if their enemy just plays slightly better. I think they're still very disconnected. Their top side looks terrible, and they're overly aggressive without really having a lot of follow-up, but it's still Hanwha Life. You have to imagine they're going to turn it around. Off of sheer talent alone, they've been able to get themselves to 500, but if they want to be better than this, it's got to turn around soon, because what we've seen so far is simply not good enough. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and there was a lot of hype, a lot of hope around one of the teams here, and unfortunately there's a buzzsaw that cuts through hope in the LCK, and that is Gen.G, who took on Dplus KIA in this particular series, and any excitement we had for DK, it's not out the window. I don't want to pretend like it's that cut and dry, but man, Gen.G really makes every team just kind of look silly, huh? It's kind of ridiculous. A 2-0 win year for Gen.G to start their year 4-0, and DK is undefeated no longer. I mean, we kind of wanted this series to be, you know, super competitive. These were two undefeated teams coming into this. Only one was going to walk out without a loss. Turns out it's Gen.G, and it's not particularly close. They end up completely gapping DK in every area of this series. There's not a single position that wasn't leaps and bounds better than their opposition. Maybe AD carry. Smash had a couple of nice moments. I think he linked up with Lucid and at least was making some plays in this series, but like everyone else on Gen.G was just so much better than DK, and it's frustrating. It's got to be frustrating if you're a DK fan that you're like, wow, we finally had some upside, some potential, and here are Gen.G to just run into us, and again, like a buzzsaw, just cut straight through us. So let's talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Keen on the top side. This guy had like a ridiculous gold lead in game number 2 on the Rumble. No one plays the Rumble into tank matchup quite like Keen. He absolutely eviscerates the tank every single time he gets the chance to play Rumble, and obviously this is how this matchup should go. Don't let Western League of Legends kind of dictate your idea of what Rumble into a tank looks like. Rumble should melt through that tank and make it a big problem for the tank to be able to play in the early laning phase, and Keen, being the best top laner in the world, consistently does that. I received some flack last year, especially in my top 20 players at Worlds video when I put Keen at number 10, and he was still my number 1 top laner, and people were like, how is Keen your number 1 top laner? How is there no top laner above number 10 on your list? Like, how is that even possible in terms of positions right now in League of Legends? And honestly, last year, I really just did not believe that there was a top laner that affected the game nearly as much as 9 other players in the world did, you know, in other positions, right? I think Keen was the best top laner, but I think it was, you know, like Keen was just a part of the Gen.G machine, right? Like, he still was very valuable and he was winning in lane, but in terms of actively winning series, I don't think he was doing that nearly as much as Chovy and Ruler and Duro and other players on his own team. And then, you know, obviously other positions just most of the time have more impact. Keen might break that mold this year because he is out for revenge. Top lane is a position that I think has gotten even less valuable in terms of how the game is structured with some of the new changes, and yet Keen is even more important. He's just dominating these top lane 1v1s and just completely taking over games right now. He's the best top laner in the world, and it's not particularly close. There's some fun players in the LPL. Bin feels like he's back. Xiaoshu has looked great at the start of the year, but Keen is just on a different level. He's on a different planet than every other top laner in the world. I also want to give a big shout out to Canyon, who I thought was excellent into Lucid in this series. This is not typically how this matchup goes between these two players. Of course, Lucid learning a lot under Canyon when both of them were on Dplus KIA many years ago when Lucid was on the Challengers team and Canyon was the star for Damwon for many years. Lucid kind of had his number. We talked about this when Lucid first came up. All of his best games and his best series were against Canyon, and it was really interesting to kind of track whether or not that was going to be consistent throughout his career. I think enough time has passed at this point where Canyon has developed some other tendencies that maybe aren't easily spottable by Lucid. He doesn't have that same kind of practice and experience that maybe he did going up against him regularly in the Dplus KIA system, and now Canyon is just starting to beat up on Lucid. I think Lucid actually made some nice plays in this series. Canyon was just straight up better in terms of what he was creating. Duro is probably the third player on the team that you really want to shout out here. The Bard was great in game 1, but I'm glad to see things like Ashe Seraphine continue to get some time at professional player in tier 1 across the entire world, because I really do think that this bot lane can be very difficult to deal with in the right circumstances. There are plenty of hyper carries right now that just have zero tools to be able to deal with Ashe and Seraphine. You know, we're seeing things like Kalista Renata really pick back up. Even Lucian Nami is starting to get back into favor. Like, Ashe Seraphine could really dominate a lot of these lanes, and I think Ashe has a lot of inbuilt value if you have carries elsewhere on the map as well. Chovy and Ruler were also great. Chovy was definitely better than Showmaker in terms of being able to play the map on the Galio. He's probably the best Galio in the world at this point. I know people will argue Faker, but go watch Chovy play Galio last year, or just listen to how I talked about Chovy's Galio last year. Trust me, he has put in a lot of time and effort to be one of the best in the world on that champion. And then, like I said, Ruler was solid, just didn't have to do all that much. The rest of the team was kind of doing everything. Keen, Canyon, and Duro, in particular, were leaps and bounds better than their opposition on the other side. For Dplus KIA, dud of the series is going to Shiwu on the top side. You know, I've been, like, pleasantly surprised with the way he's been laning so far. Same thing for someone like Rich. It just feels like a lot of the bad laning top laners have started to really lock in and figure things out, at the very least in terms of stabilizing. Keen is just a different beast. He's not able to survive in the 1v1 against Keen, even playing something like Sion on weak side. He kind of just gets turbo destroyed in the 1v1, like the Rumble just melts through his health bar and he's never really able to be useful throughout the game at any point again. He gives up like a 5,000 gold lead to Keen on the other side of this matchup. It's a really big top gap. You know, it's Shiwu, like his laning is always going to be inconsistent, and it's Keen. He just kind of beats everybody, but you would have hoped to see something a bit better from him in this series. And I think talking about young players that you wanted to see play a bit better, you know, Career had an unbelievable performance on the Nami in the previous series that they played this week. Not so much here against Duro and against Gen.G. This was a pretty big outclassing, I'll just say. 2 Enchanter games coming out from Career. I think he's really good at Enchanters, but Duro is better, like in terms of just how he's able to execute, and obviously the game state is just better, but I think the support gap in here was also pretty massive. Lucid's KDA looks pretty bad. That's because he was the only one actively looking for plays, I would say, alongside Smash, who was also at least trying to push the game forward for Dplus KIA. Smash was probably the best player on the Rift for DK in this one. Not that that was too high of a bar, I think, to reach or anything like that. Showmaker was literally doing 0 damage at the end of the game. It was really pathetic watching Syndra try and kill Galio because there was just no way that that was ever going to happen. This was definitely Showmaker's weakest series of the year, and Chovy has basically always had his number as a player here in the LCK. It just feels unfortunate. DK was a team with so much momentum, so much steam coming off of their first 3 series, and it feels like it all just kind of came crashing down here. I still have high hopes for them to potentially even be top 3 with the way that Hanwha Life are playing right now, but Gen.G strike back, and they strike back strong. Like, this is the #1 team in the world, and quite frankly, it's just not all that close right now. But that's going to bring us to our 5th and final day of action here in the LCK in week number 2. Remember, this is the final full week of LCK action, so these are some important games here, and that carries through between T1 and BNK FearX, where T1 is going to pick up the victory. No surprise there, but what is surprising is just how tough it is for T1 to ever look like anything other than the most beatable team in the entire universe until they're not. They always look really good in game number 1. Maybe it takes them a little bit too long to close something out. They just throw away draft in game number 2, have a bunch of weird things happen. Faker picks Yone, and they play Aurora Yone, you know, solo lane duo. Okay, whatever, man. And then you go to game number 3, and they make it as agonizing as possible to try and watch them overcome their own challenges. It still is incredibly easy for T1 to win a game number 3 because for some reason Galio and Bard are available in game 3 against T1, but they, you know, BFX made them work for it, and, you know, you can give some credit to BFX because of that. I still think this team is playing really well right now. They're probably the 5th or 4th best performing team in the LCK, just kind of depending on where you want to put, you know, KT Rolster. I mean, BFX have been better than Hanwha Life up until this point. I don't think they will continue to be better than Hanwha Life, but it's still nice to see that this team is performing well and they're utilizing their inbuilt cohesion to really start off strong. But getting into it for T1, kind of talking about what ended up working. Come on, man. You gave KIA his Bard in game number 3. He's player of the series here. He popped off in that third and final game. There's just nobody in the world who plays this champion quite like KIA. Busio is like the only one that comes to mind that's even close. And even then, like, there is still definitely a separation between KIA and everyone else on this champ. Not that I need to explain that to you. You already know it. Like, the way that he's able to create and play, make, and survive in a lot of these fights is just absurd. Like, are there things he could have done better in this series? Absolutely. I don't think the Thresh game in game number 2 was perfect. I don't even really think the Nami game in game number 1 was perfect, although I think it was pretty darn good. But the Bard was so important in game number 3 that it's really hard to imagine T1 being able to walk out with as clean of a win in game number 3 as maybe they would have wanted without drafting that. So, credit to KIA, thought he was really good here. You continue to get really nice performances out of the main key players. Paze was great in this series. I think he had a nice bounce back after, I don't want to say underwhelming earlier on in the week, but he kind of needed to be a bit better in their first series, and I'm glad to see he was in this second one against Diablo and Kellen, one of the better bot lane duos in the entire league. I think Paze and KIA really stepped up as a duo, and Paze as a late game carry continues to be a massive win condition for T1. I want to consistently see them put him on these hyper carries, right? Like, I think that is just the way for them to consistently win games, because Faker, Owner, KIA, they can create, even Doran, right? Like, they can create in the mid game. They can get Paze to a point where he doesn't really need to have a lot of gold or responsibility, where he can play from neutral and still take over the game. Faker continues to be really solid. I thought he had a great week. I'm not going to say he was awesome. Vikla's really good right now, man. Like, this guy's actually just playing at a really high-end level. His laning looks incredible, and I do think there were a lot of times in this series where I watched him just play better than Faker in the laning phase, but Faker continued to have a bigger impact elsewhere on the map. If you take out the Yone game, things look a lot better for Faker in this series. Owner is super aggressive, and so was Raptor. For the most part, that went better for Owner, especially on the Pantheon in game number 3, but not always going to be something that they're able to get away with in the same kind of way that maybe they were in this series. And then Doran was, there. We'll talk about it. I don't think I really wrote a single note on either top laner throughout this series. It really just was, okay, like, I think Doran had a couple of nice moments on the Cassante in terms of the team fights in game number 3, but, like, this was not a consequential series overall for either top laner, so they just ended up being a part of the action. KIA, to me, player of the series, but I think it could go in a couple of different ways. And for BFX, I, again, just want to continue to praise this team. I actually just think they're playing really well right now in terms of the form they're putting out. If Raptor was, like, slightly better at executing on Qiyana, I think this series does look a little bit different, but unfortunately, that is not the case. Raptor, for me, is going to get dud of the series, despite the fact that he had all the gold and all the resources in game number 3. That was the problem. It was that he had all the gold and resources because he was not going to be able to execute like, a lot of the Qianas we've seen globally. LPL Qiyana is, like, genuinely a thing for a reason, because it just seems like every other region does not understand how to maximize this champion in the same way that the LPL can. Raptor had a really good Jarvan game in game number 2, so it felt kind of bad to give him this, especially because he led the team in kills throughout this entire series, but I really just think he was not consequential enough. He wasn't important enough in game number 3, and he was the one they were relying on to win them the game, and it just didn't really happen. Again, want to keep giving a lot of credit to players like Vikla. I think Vikla's maybe been the best player on this team so far in 2026. If you would have told me that at the beginning of the year, I would have laughed at you, but it kind of is the truth. I think Kellen had a couple of moments in this series. This was really the first time this year where it's like, Kellen's engage tools are just not perfect. He's not always the most consistent in the mid game. He can get caught out, and his positioning can sometimes be bad, but Diablo also wasn't perfect here. I also think Diablo kind of got outplayed by Paze on the other side of this. Not that that should be particularly surprising for a player like Diablo. He's very good, but he's not quite top 3 just yet. Paze is one of the best AD carries in the world. You're allowed one series where the bot lane is, like, fine rather than being excellent, because they've had to hard carry this team so many times. And again, Clear was not a part of this series. The top laners were basically on their own island. I never really thought about either of them at any point, but overall, for BFX, I'm still pretty positive walking out of this series about them. I still feel pretty good about where they are sitting. Do I think that they're guaranteed to be, like, a truly competitive team? No, I think it's likely that they're somewhere around the 6th best team in the league, but if they were the 5th best team in the league, hell, if they even got themselves up to being, like, the 4th best team in the league early on in the year before a lot of other teams have figured out their own set of chemistry, I wouldn't really be all that surprised. One thing's for sure, though, I feel pretty confident that they are a playoff team. And then for T1, on the other side, this is one of the top 2 teams in the league. It's them and Gen.G. Unfortunately for us, they're in the same group, so we will not get to see them play in the LCK Cup regular season. We will likely have to wait until the playoffs to see that, but with the way that things are going right now, it seems pretty likely we might be getting another finals between these two historic organizations. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, and it was certainly another fun one with another comeback. It was KT Rolster taking on HANJIN BRION, and KT Rolster are going to pick up the 2-1 series win. Unfortunately for Bro, that means they are the only team coming out of week number 2 without a win yet, but KT get themselves to 500. They get themselves in a spot where at the very least they can try and be competitive going into the playoffs. I still think this team needs to work on a lot. It's clear they really want to commit to the 6-man roster right now. I'm never a fan of a 6-man roster. I almost always am more willing to push teams into just being like, figure out who your starting 5 are and get communication down, especially for a support position that does so much of the macro and so much of the heavy lifting in terms of the decision making. Having 2 players really complicates things because you're not able to get that communication and I guess communication network down. I think that is the way that I've always put it. You want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and that becomes harder when you're constantly swapping people in and out. Despite that, they are still able to pick up a victory here in game number 3, and there is quite a bit to talk about. So let's get into it. You know, the comeback is kind of real in game number 2. Bro probably has this series in the bag if they don't just completely throw things away in that second game, but Gideon was completely unwilling to do damage. I think that is a fair way to put it. I think that's the vocabulary that maybe I'd be using in game number 3 here, as we'll talk about a bit later, and I think KT was more than willing to capitalize on that. And the player that I think capitalized on it the most was probably Polu in the support position. I've been very critical of him. He's gotten multiple dud of the series so far for me throughout this year for KT Rolster. It just feels like he is like the weak link of the way that they're playing right now, but for me, he was definitely the best player on the team in this series. I don't really know what the answer is here in the support position. I mean, I know what my answer is, which is even with player of the series here, you don't need Polu here. You see a lot of people online, and I am going to rant a bit here because it's something that I ranted about in the LPL video, and I'm going to continue to rant here. If you are someone, genuinely, and if you watch my videos and you disagree with this point, please let me know down in the comments. I'm very curious, but if you are someone who looks at Ghost and the way he's playing right now, and you genuinely feel like you have an answer to whether or not the experiment is working or not, I can never be on the same page as you. Like, how can you possibly sit here 4 series in to him learning a brand new position and say that it's either a success or a failure? How can you possibly have an answer to that question by now? This guy's played like 10 games so far as a support in professional play, and you're trying to go, well, it's clear that Polu's going to be better than him. He's going to have a higher floor. He's played 10 games, man. These games don't even really matter all that much right now. Like, we're already casting judgment. We're already giving up on what was always going to be clearly a project. This is why, you know, rookies have such a hard time transitioning into tier 1, and Ghost is obviously not a rookie, he's a world champion, but like it's a similar mentality where it's like, why is it so results focused day number 1? Why can't we just allow a player to try and grow? I'm not going to sit here and say that KT looks great with Ghost in. I do think they've looked better for the most part with Ghost in than Polu, who just does not have any upside. That was definitely not the case in this particular series, but you know, how can we sit here and say that, oh, you know, Ghost was a good punt in the offseason, but you know, he's not good day number 1. He's not instantly one of the best supports in the league, so therefore we should move on from him. How can both of those things be true from KT Rolster fans? I just don't really understand it. Again, if you disagree with that, let me know in the comment section. It just really makes me upset to see like genuine KT Rolster fans or people online, like on Twitter and on Reddit, be like, oh, Ghost is clearly not going to be better for us than Polu. We might as well bench him. What's even the point, man? Like truly, genuinely, what is the point of all of this if that is going to be your mentality? It just feels like I don't want to win Worlds. I don't ever want to build a good player. Like, I know I'm extrapolating here, but like, you know, I've talked about this with a lot of rookies in the past where it's like, how are you ever supposed to develop talent if they have to be good day number 1? Like, they have to be able to make mistakes, and I think Ghost is making mistakes. Hopefully he can grow from them. That's the end of that conversation. Polu was great here. He made a lot of plays on the Nico and the Nautilus. He was definitely better than Namgung, who has also started out very slow for Bro. We kind of expected that. He was not a player with great tape at the tier 2 level. Polu was really, really nice. And Aiming, I think, capitalized on it well. Aiming and Teddy, ironically enough, are players that I've compared a lot throughout their careers. I think they're very similar in the way that they play. I think Aiming is more mechanically talented, which lets him, you know, capitalize, I think, on the things that are created a bit more. And he's definitely much more aggressive in the late game, whereas Teddy really is just a product of whatever the hell is going on the map. He doesn't really create anything on his own, but Aiming was certainly a player here who played well. Hopefully he can continue to step up. Like, I don't think he's, you know, in theory, a downgrade from what they had in Doctum last year. I talked about that. That was a change grade for me. He should be better mechanically than someone like Doctum is, and theoretically he should give you a bit more upside. It's all really just about if the rest of the team can come in around him and really facilitate that support in particular. BDD got Zoe in game number 3. That's always a good sign. You never really want to give him that champion. You know, Perfect and Cuz, I think, had their good moments. Gideon was able to generate a ton of resources into Cuz, but Gideon was so much worse in the late game that it's almost not even worth talking about. We will get to that. And Perfect was also just generally along for the ride against his former top lane competition in casting. There are good things to talk about here for KT. I honestly do think they played the back end of this series well. Game number 3 was very solid from them, but I just need to see some more consistency, and I also just want to see this team invest into the project that they have clearly wanted to take on. If you want Ghost to become a good support, allow him to become a good support. And then for Bro on the other side, like, I don't want to give dud of the series to Gideon, but I am going to give it to Gideon. He was really good at generating resources. He was awesome in game 1 on the Pantheon and was really good at the beginning of game 2 on the Mbessa, but somewhere in the middle of game number 2, his brain just kind of flipped off, and then he's doing 2,000 damage on Vi throughout the entirety of game number 3, and it's just disgusting. Like, the lack of aggression and the lack of playmaking, just the overall passiveness coming in from Gideon was completely unacceptable. At the end of this series, they had it in the palm of their hands, and it's clear that he just was not ready to cross that finish line. I continue to think that Romer is just not in a good spot. His four first series have all been bad. Ironically enough, this was probably the best series he's played so far in the LCK going into BDD, but even then, he was definitely worse than BDD on the other side of this matchup. Teddy and Namgung, I think, were fine. Polu was definitely better than Namgung when he came in, but I thought he had a really good game number 1 on the Rakan, and Teddy is KDA, always looks really good. That doesn't always mean he's playing well on the Rift, it's just generally the way he plays the game. Casting was fine on the top side. Like, there isn't a lot to be like, oh, you know, Bro was terrible. They probably had control of this series, as we've talked about, from multiple teams. They should have probably won game number 2 and swept this series, which would have been a nightmare for KT Rolster, but instead, they lose in 3 games, and they kind of get blown out in game number 3, and there's not really a lot to talk about. For KT, it's a nice win to be able to stay 500, but I really just do not like the direction that this org is going in from a process perspective. It feels like you're trying to develop young players while also not trying to lose right now, and I think those two things are just at odds. You need to make sure that your players are in as good of a spot as possible to make those mistakes, to learn and grow, and to develop some synergy so that later in the year, when it actually does matter, you can come together and win games. And right now, it feels like you're trying to stop the bleeding in winter in LCK Cup, and that just feels like bad process to me. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK Cup week number 2 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings between the two groups, and yet again, we are at a stalemate. It is a 10-10 tie right now in terms of these two groups. While Group Baron definitely has the 2 best teams in the league right now in Gen.G and T1, the only 2 undefeated teams, they also have the only winless team in the entire league in Bro, and this is why I was so intrigued by the way that things worked out last week, because we really are in a spot where these matchups in week number 3 mean a lot, and you know, it really could go either way. I think that there are a couple of matchups that really could swing, but any upset would likely tip the favor in whoever ends up upsetting the other, right? Like, you can't afford to lose to a team that you were supposed to beat at this point, and that goes for the top teams as well, especially for teams like Dplus KIA or KT Rolster, or even a team like, you know, Nongshim that needs to come out and be able to pick up a big win over a KT Rolster side that, you know, hasn't looked all that good as of late. That could be the series deciding, or I guess the group deciding matchup. So a lot on the line here, but it's time to talk about my power rankings, or normally I would talk about my power rankings here and talk about how they have changed, but quite frankly, the LCK is in flux right now. There is a lot of stuff going on. There's just not really a lot of concrete evidence. I don't feel comfortable making a lot of changes right now. I really don't feel it's very clear cut on who, you know, is kind of separating themselves in the middle of everything. I think tiers have been established, but these teams were already in the correct tiers. Gen.G at 1, T1 at 2, I think those are obvious. I'm gonna keep HLE at 3, mostly because I just have faith that they're going to be able to turn it around. Have DK been better than them? Absolutely so far this split, but I just don't feel comfortable moving them down to number 4 quite yet. If they go out and don't play particularly well in the playoffs, then yeah, they're going to go into, you know, the spring split number 2 as, you know, a number 4 team. But, you know, until I see them actually lose in a big moment against a team that, you know, they actually should be losing to, that's not Nongshim, right? Because it's a random regular season game. Until I see them go out in a best of 5 and actively lose in a situation where they shouldn't, I'm going to pretend like they're going to figure things out. DK, though, are still very obviously at 4. I really debated moving BFX up to number 5 because honestly, they are the 5th best team in the LCK right now, but KT should be able to figure their own stuff out. I thought they played better in game number 3 at the end of the week as well, even though it was into Bro. You know, 5 and 6 I think are pretty up for debate, and then the bottom 4, whatever order you want, man. I considered moving DRX up to number 7 despite the fact that they lost to DNS early in the week. Hell, DNS might move up to number 7 or number 8, but Pioshik is running it down. Nongshim is going to keep that spot, but they lose to DRX this week, which is not a good loss, and players like Sponge, and we'll talk about, you know, Taeyun and Lahens, they did not look good good this week at all. Bro is the only real clear cut, like they are the number 10 team in the league right now. I don't think there's really a lot of argument in that direction, and they come in as number 10 in my power rankings, but outside of that, number 7 through 9 are also pretty up in flux, just like number 5 and 6, and even really 3 and 4. So a lot still to be determined, I guess, is the way to put it. And I don't want to make any judgments right now. I think I'm going to be more comfortable making those after week number 3. So those are my power rankings. Let me know if you would have changed anything, or if you think it's right to kind of pump the brakes and just, keep everything the same until proven otherwise. I'm curious to know what you guys' thoughts and opinions are. But let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 2. Player of the week was not easy. I don't think there was a clear-cut answer like there have been in some other weeks, but for me, I ended up landing onto Keen, the top laner for Gen.G. He really was probably the most dominant player across this week, certainly in their matchup against Dplus KIA. He was incredibly dominant. He was still very good against BNK FearX. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to pretend like, BFX or Clear put up a fight at all against him, but, he really kind of separated himself on the Gwen and on the Rumble in that series, and he deserves player of the week for that. Keen is really cementing himself as like a top 5 player in the world at the current moment, and by far the best top laner in the world. Honorable mentions for me, Faker, the mid laner for T1. Faker is awesome, and I think he's had a great start to the split. If he can keep this up for a good amount of time, that's going to be really fun. He doesn't usually start hot, so it's nice to see him have such a good start to 2026. We've seen him have good regular seasons in recent memory. 2023 and 2024 really come to mind in that regard, but it wasn't really the case in 2025, and he's not always been known for domestic consistency. It started off really nice. I just hope it continues. And then Zeka, the mid laner for Hanwha Life. HLE have a myriad of problems right now. They have a lot of things going wrong for them, but Zeka has been good, I would say, at the start of this split. His aggressiveness is back. He's certainly looking for a lot of skirmishes. I think part of that is that Kanavi is playing so aggro for them in the jungle, but Zeka, I think, has benefited from that playstyle quite a bit, and I thought he was pretty good this week, even in some of the games that they maybe weren't as consistent in. So Faker and Zeka are my honorable mentions. And then my dud of the week is unfortunately going to go to Lehens, the support for NS RedForce. His KDA is not always going to look good when this team loses, but it was his gameplay that got him dud of the week here for sure. He just does not look connected right now to Taeyun or to the rest of this roster. I don't really know what's going on with Lehens. It does not feel like he's as mentally checked in as he was in Winter Split last year. Let's remember, he wasn't playing with a great AD carry or jungler in 2025 either in the Winter Split, although Gideon was playing fine. His mid laner was the one who was running it down. Mid and AD carry were not good positions for that team, and he still was looking like maybe the single best support in the world. He almost beat Gen.G in the playoffs by himself in the LCK Cup last year. Certainly not giving that same kind of performance so far this year. Hopefully he can turn it back around. But Lehens is my dud of the week, and Keen is my player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're covering the LCK Cup every week here, and week 3 will be the final regular season week, but we still got the play-ins, we've still got the playoffs, we've got everything to cover here in the LCK, and we also cover the LCS, the LEC, and the LPL every single week on this channel as well. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all